It's actually quite an interesting circuit because, I mean, the first part of it is very Bahrainish, I think. Nothing wrong with that. It's Bahrain without the undulations, lots of sort of breaking into tight corners, acceleration runs, short acceleration runs, another medium speed corner. But the second half of the lap opens out and there are about 3 to 4 really quick corners between 6th, 7th gear. Some of them not quite flat either. Certainly what we saw this afternoon. Probably they will be in qualifying form when they pick up grip. But it's quite unusual to see a circuit with so many quick corners, particularly not all of them flat. So we saw quite a lot of errors today as the circuit was picking up grip, but equally as other cars went off and left dust on the track, we saw quite a lot of cars running wide. There's lots of runoff areas, surprise, surprise, but quite a lot of dust and desert that you can pick up if you go too far. Track limits came into play. There was one incident, we'll get onto all that Michael Masi decision-making stuff towards the end of this video, but there was one moment when Valtteri Bottas did a very quick lap early in FP2 and it was deleted because it was turn 7 because of a track limits drama. And he got on the radio and said, well, nice of them to tell us now, i.e. translation, that wasn't one of the corners that they told us they were going to be enforcing track limits. Michael, he said at the end of it, like a full stop, which gives you a taste, I think, of where Mercedes are at the moment with their feelings about the administration of Formula One. But again, we'll get onto that in a minute. In fairness to whoever's making the decisions, I guess it's Michael Masi, when Bottas did run wide, it was really seriously wide. It was like, yeah, come on. It looked like he'd shaved a complete apex off the lap almost. But nonetheless, to his credit, Valtteri then went out and went fastest of all with a perfect lap in terms of no use of excess track limits and did the time. The other interesting thing about Qatar is because of these quick corners towards the end of the lap, well, back end of sector 2, there's a straight, which is a straight that rewards grip and balance through a 6th gear corner, and the terminal velocity reached just before they brake for the next corner is very similar to the terminal velocity on the pit straight where the main speed trap is. So it's an interesting circuit like that. You've got the speed trap on the straight, but you've also got the trap on the exit of a very, very fast corner, and they get to almost to terminal velocity. Well, in some cases, they're faster there than they are on the straight. So we need to think about what that means. In reality, of course, what you want is to be flat through all the corners and have a top speed advantage. So with that in mind, let's just have a look at what they were doing in the last third of FP2 this afternoon when they were running full fuel loads, or as heavy fuel anyway, on long runs, on mediums or hard tyres. Because you know basically what happened on the soft tyre. We can go through that in a minute. You can see the times out there. But these are times that are not necessarily shown. And we can go through the key runners just to see where they were at in terms of top speed versus the downforce level they were running and how much grip they had coming out of that fast section at the back end of sector 2. So Max Verstappen's quickest lap with a fuel load was a 28.1, which is pretty quick. I mean, Lewis did a 28.0. Valtteri was significantly quicker, but both of them were running soft tyres, and that may be important as well because Valtteri was uniquely on the mediums doing the long runs, oddly. But both Max and Lewis are doing their long runs on the soft tyres and approximately the same lap time. Max 28.1, Lewis 28.0, as I say. But the interesting thing is that when Max was doing those laps, you're looking at a typical top speed of 291, 294, 292. And that was on the speed trap. That's, in other words, the speed through the air of the Red Bull Honda. But when he did that 28.1, which was towards the end of his run, he was actually quicker coming out of that speed trap section at sector 2, 296. And he's doing 292 in a straight line. So that just shows, I think, how quick the Red Bull is on high-speed corners, how much downforce it generates. They're probably going to look at that and think, well, we can take downforce out of the car now, obviously, because we want more top speed and we perhaps don't need such an advantage through the quick corner. But really interesting. Compare that with Lewis Hamilton, who was doing 290, about the same terminal velocity, 294, 296, 292, so in a straight line, about exactly equal with Max Verstappen, but significantly slower out of that last section in sector 2, 289, 289, 287. So I say significantly, we're talking 3 or 4 kilometers an hour, which out of a corner is quite significant. So I think that means something. Not quite sure what yet. Of course, Lewis almost certainly will be putting in a better engine for tomorrow, so shouldn't read too much into that. Valtteri Bottas was actually quickest on these long runs. 27.6 was his quickest time right at the end. And when he did that 27.6, admittedly, we should bear in mind here that he's on the medium tyre, so therefore he could do longer runs. He did a very long run. And therefore the fuel load was probably lighter when he did it. So that has to be taken into account as well. But 27.6, he did 2:27.6 that I saw. 295 terminal velocity, 291 exit of the section in sector 2, that quick corner. So actually closer and quicker through out of that in sector 2. In terms of soft tyres, in FP2, it was kind of after about 20 minutes, they all put on a new set, having got the balance about right in this new ambient temperature that they had with the sun now down, and particularly Lewis and Sergio Perez switching to completely clear visors, which is, I guess, an indication that the lighting isn't quite as bright as we've seen in other night tracks. Maybe not. Maybe it's a glare thing, but it was actually great to see because you can look right into their eyes with the Perez and Hamilton. Be interesting to see how many others do that tomorrow as well. Do that for tomorrow. But Valtteri in this middle section, where they're all out going for these one-lap runs on soft tyres, 23.1. Pierre Gasly did a 23.5, really good lap. But then Max went out quite late at the back end of that group and did a 23.4. So he was actually second quickest on that run. But doing 23.1, Valtteri's top speed on the straight, 309. And the speed out of sector 2, 307. So when Max did his time on the soft tyres, he did a 23.4, 304 in a straight line compared with Valtteri 309, and 302 out of the quick corner, Valtteri 307. So again, make of that what you will. I think, it's pretty clear the Mercedes is going to be quicker in a straight line in most forms, both fuel and light. But over the lap, it looks as if Mercedes and Red Bull, surprise, surprise, very evenly matched. Now let's move on to a couple of matters of moment now. The first, of course, is that Mercedes did try to get a review of the decision taken during the race, during the Brazilian Grand Prix. The decision being that it was just a racing accident and there'd be no action taken when Max Verstappen on the inside of turn 4 appeared to turn to the right with steering angle, forcing Lewis off the track, who was on the outside at that point, trying to pass him, obviously. And Mercedes believed that they had new evidence, which was new camera angles of this, and I would guess some sort of telemetry showing the steering inputs from Max. And it was sat on for 2 or 3 days, trying to bring the stewards to look at this again, presumably to get some sort of penalty for Max. And the decision today by the Brazilian Grand Prix stewards, but during this Qatar weekend, was that no, there was not enough new evidence, basically, for this to be taken any further. You know my opinion on this. My opinion is that the guy on the inside, and I'm speaking now about motor racing going back to, I don't know, French Grand Prix 1906, the guy on the inside basically owns the corner, and the guy on the outside, if he wants to do a pass, has to evaluate a number of things. Is it possible to do the pass there? Have I got the right speed differential? Is there enough room to do it? And then he has to time it perfectly with a position of momentum and acceleration run. And if he gets any of those wrong, he's going to be off in the boondocks on the outside. Today, luckily, it means just going off on the runoff area at most circuits, not Monaco, obviously. But, we've seen that happen. And basically, you don't, if it's a left-hander, the guy on the outside doesn't turn left until the guy on the inside turns left. That's just a basic rule of racing, going right back to Formula Ford, right down to Formula Ford grassroots racing. It all changed, of course, in Austria in 2020 when Alex Albon, at a restart after a safety car thing, was quicker than Lewis. For sure, the Red Bull was coming up, got its temperatures up faster than the Mercedes at this point. But nonetheless, Lewis goes into the downhill right-hander, which I guess is turn 4 again, interestingly, significantly, perhaps ironically, going into the right hand. Lewis is on the inside, and Albon goes around the outside of him. And of course, if Lewis at this point decides not to use all the road, not to use the racing line, he's going to give room to Alex Albon, and they're going to go around side by side, and Alex probably will get the run down into the next left-hander. But then Lewis is absolutely entitled, in my view, to use all the road. It's his corner, he's on the inside, use the racing line. And it's up to Alex Albon to pass at exactly the right moment, not to just wait for Lewis to come and use all the road and drive off the track. Anyway, that's what happened. And Albon went off, and surprise, surprise, shock to me actually, it was Lewis that got the penalty for that. You could argue, and I did, that it was actually Alex Albon that caused that accident, because if he hadn't tried to pass Lewis on the outside, there wouldn't have been an accident. But he did get the penalty, Lewis. And as a result of that, and I think we've had Lando Norris and Sergio Perez both penalised with similar incidents since then. So it's kind of, and I've kind of just thought, I'll put my brain into neutral over this one, because it's obviously something everybody's going to accept, like speed bumps and everything else that's weird in the world. And speed bumps that aren't uniform across the width of the road, that only slow down some cars, but not big transit vans that have no brake power. Anyway, that's another story. I just kind of accepted it, which I suppose is wrong, but I just did as, one of the things that you just have to live with in Formula One. But then we had the similar situation come in Brazil, and you would think in that situation, based on what happened in Austria, that where Lewis got the penalty, that Max Verstappen would get the penalty in Brazil, but he didn't. They just said, race on, racing incident, carry on, which Jonathan Wheatley, I'm sure, was very happy about. And I mean, part of me, as I said in the video last week, part of me was very happy about that, because that's what I think should have happened. I think that's what should have happened in Austria. But what we need now, I think, is a proper statement from whoever, I guess Michael Masi, saying, yeah, we've got it wrong until now. There's no way in the world the guy on the inside should be penalised if somebody on the outside trying to pass you runs out of road because you're using all the road. We got that wrong, and we've now got it right. And what we did in Brazil is the first round of getting it right, and it will be like this forevermore. That's what I said last week. And so long as it is like this forevermore, and if you do try to pass on the outside and you run out of road, it's a racing accident, and the guy on the inside doesn't get a penalty, that's fine with me. But it isn't fine if there's going to be more inconsistency. In other words, if we have a repeat of what we saw in Austria, and a driver on the inside using all the road gets penalised because the guy who's trying to pass him on the outside runs out of road. If that happens again, then I will go ballistic, I've got to say. And I think the rest of motor racing will as well. But at the moment, I'm just going to say, well, I'm assuming the FIA have realised their mistakes in Austria and those other incidents with Lando and Sergio. And now we're going into a new regime of, if you pass on the outside, you're taking your life in your own hands, or the race anyway, and the incident in your own hands. And you certainly cannot blame the guy on racing line, if he starts to use the road that he's entitled to use. Why should he have to compromise his corner, slow down and brake, and suddenly move to the left just because there's somebody on the outside? Why should he have to do that? That is not what motor racing has ever been all about. Anyway, that's that. The next point is related to some of the comments we've had on the channel as a result of my videos in Brazil, from people saying, yeah, but Lewis Hamilton had this fresh engine and that's why he was able to pass so many cars. And he said afterwards that, the engine had much more punch out of the corner leading onto the straight. Of course, a new internal combustion engine, in theory, a fresh one, is always going to feel better than an old one that's at the end of its mileage. That's the first thing that needs to be said. The second thing that needs to be said is that we should look at all the top speeds, because they are quite indicative of how much power or not drivers have. And after qualifying, in Q3, when all the drivers are stretching their engines to the absolute limit, these were the top speeds from Brazil. Okay, fastest on the straight, Fernando Alonso in the Alpine, 323. Nothing unusual there. The Alpine's always is quite a low drag car, doesn't generate a massive amount of inherent downforce, so we'll kind of put that to one side, 323. Then, tied for second place at 322, Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, and Valtteri Bottas. Both Mercedes drivers doing exactly the same top speed, and Lando Norris the same in the Mercedes-powered McLaren. The third group at 319, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. Ferrari constantly running as little wing as they can to try to get some decent top speed, but hammer their tyres and not great around corners. So we'll again put those to one side. Daniel Ricciardo in the other McLaren Mercedes, 319, and Max Verstappen in the Red Bull Honda, 319. And just behind him, Sergio Perez, 318 in the other Red Bull Honda. So yes, of course, Lewis had would have felt that the fresh engine gave him more power compared with the only thing he could relate it to, the older engine at the end of its life. But relative to Valtteri Bottas, he was no quicker. Relative to the McLarens, he was no quicker. And the difference between Lewis and Max was the same as Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez. So I just think that point needs to be made. I'm not saying that this adds to the great aura around Lewis Hamilton. I think a lot of other factors came into that brilliant drive of his to win the Brazilian Grand Prix. And not the least of those was that I think Red Bull, and I still maintain this, should have run that race one stop. And had they done so, they would have had more chance of beating Lewis. But that's another point. I seem to be the only guy saying that, but I really think that's the case. And it was kind of underlined by Mercedes saying, yeah, we could have done that. For sure, Valtteri was correct. We could have run a one-stop strategy and it would have been very quick. So, as I said before, if Mercedes could have run a one-stop strategy, then for sure, Red Bull Honda could have run a one-stop strategy. So anyway, I just wanted to put those top speeds into perspective of the Brazilian Grand Prix and the supposed massive advantage that Lewis had with that new internal combustion unit he had in the car. So that's it on this Friday in the build-up to the Qatar Grand Prix. Of course, we have ahead of us another Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen duel, or is it a Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton duel? We will see as the weekend unfolds. Tomorrow, as I say, it'll be qualifying at night, exactly the same time as the race on Sunday around this brand new circuit in Formula One with some really impressive quick corners towards the end of its lap. See you then.